Welcome participants. As you begin to arrive, we'll be beginning shortly. Just going to wait for everyone to arrive on the webinar. Thanks for coming. Again, if you have questions as we're preparing, feel free to use the Q&A feature or as well the chat box for any questions that you have during the program. All right, everyone, I think we'll begin here momentarily. We're right on the 1 o'clock hour. Just give a few more seconds to see if any last minute people arrive. Hello and welcome everyone to SagePresence's webinar today, Navigating and Leading Virtual Business Development. My name is Troy Parkinson. I'll be helping facilitate the session today, and it will be moderated by SagePresence co-founder Pete Machalek. Today's few quick housekeeping notes for those of you who are on the call today, and many of you are used to this Zoom process now. If you do have questions throughout, please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A box or on the chat box. I'll be monitoring those notes throughout the process, and we'll interject with the questions throughout the program. Also, this session will be recorded, and we'll be able to send you a link via email where you'll be able to play the replay on our website at sagepresence.com. So I'd like to welcome today our moderator, Pete Machalek from SagePresence. Our speakers are Chris Terry, Tanya Pierce, and Craig Anderson. So Pete, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thanks so much, Troy. So the reason I wanted to do this session is SagePresence is a group of consultants and trainers. And what we do is we work with professional service organizations to help them build business generally with their frontline workers, the folks who typically get the most automatic face time with prospects and clients. And when the coronavirus hit, we thought, we know what we know. And we know that a lot of our clients know more than us about what's going on for them, for the architecture firms and the engineering firms and the construction firms. So we've done webinars where we shared our perspective and our expertise around what you can and should be doing in a scenario like this. But this scenario is so new. And I think maybe the safest thing to say is nobody really knows anything at this point. We've been around, we've been inside of this for 7 or 8 weeks now, and the situation is changing a lot. I think what we're in right now is very different from what we were facing 7 weeks ago. And so what I wanted to do with this session was bring in some friends from the field, the business development leaders that I've gotten to know well over the course of the last 20 years of SagePresence working with folks, and getting their perspective kind of from the trenches, asking them what's going on for them. And each person that we invited to participate today has a wealth of history and a wealth of perspective that I wanted to be able to share with everybody out there. So as Troy said, we invite questions as we proceed here. I've got a bunch of questions for each of these folks. But let's kind of swim around with it together. My goal is that by the end of this session, everybody here, me and the 3 panelists and everybody participating here, have at least one really good idea that they haven't put into practice yet, that they want to to test out in order to grow business for their firm. So here's what I want to do. Let's start with you, Chris. I'm going to give each one of you an opportunity to just talk about yourselves and your histories, and let's just hear sort of your CV right now. Let's hear your backgrounds that have brought you here. So Chris first.
We're in Craig's case, the album, right?
There we go.
So I've been involved directly in the construction industry about 10 years. And I say directly, I've been worked with a fairly large Midwestern construction company. Prior to that, I spent all in relationship development. Prior to that, I was in the finance world, spending a lot of time customer facing, market leadership, leading different teams from a standpoint of business and community development, relationship development. And that was on the financial side of things, working indirectly with the industry. And through that process, you learn a lot about yourselves. You learn a lot about how to grow markets and how to develop people as well as yourself. I've got a lot of lessons learned. Hopefully I haven't made some of those mistakes more than once. But a lot of my experience has been in building high performance, business development teams from the finance side, did a little bit of retail sales in there in the marine industry years ago when I was pretty young and, as some would say, wet behind the ears. But been in the construction industry about 10 years now, and it's been very fun industry. It's a lot of work. There's things you can try that can be new, and I'm about relationships and developing honest relationships with transparency built on trust, and you can pick up the phone and just give somebody a call. So that's a little bit about me and my CD, I guess, as you would say, Pete.
Great. And your current situation is you're independent, which which was one of the reasons why I thought of you, actually. I think the fact that you're independent in this scenario right now, I think gives you a really interesting scenario, or a really interesting perspective to look out on this. Mm-hmm. And as we were talking just in the warm up to this session here, you said that you've had lots of conversations with lots of organizations, which I imagine gives you kind of a uniquely varied perspective on just what's going on for organizations.
Yeah, it's been very interesting. Yep.
Yeah.
It's actually a fun time to be independent, to be honest with you.
Good. Well, fantastic. So actually that inspires me to move on to Tanya. So Tanya was independent and landed literally the day the quarantine began. Is that right, Tanya?
Yeah, March 30th.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your history.
Thank you, Pete, and thank you for this opportunity. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I have to say, I didn't expect to add to my memoirs starting a new job and getting to know a team of 14 marketing professionals virtually. That's not something our industry knows. I know there are people in other walks of life that's all they know is virtual teammates, but that's not something I at all in my wildest dreams anticipated. But here I am getting to know everybody via voice and resume photo and the occasional Zoom call that I can actually kind of see them and what their backgrounds are. But so I've been in design and construction 20 years. The joke is I grew up with mud in my blood. My parents owned an excavating company growing up, and I always kind of felt I would somehow end up in the space, but I was not cut out for the engineering world or engineering school. I had no interest in that. So I did what every good student does. They fall back on business, right? What else should you do? So I have a business degree and got out of school and started out of the industry many moons ago, but then landed in a role in landscape construction, doing sales for them, which then led me into every general contractor office that I could get into, and really got an opportunity to see how they build their relationships. And that brought me down the road to Adolphson and Peterson Construction, which is where I spent my first, really where I cut my teeth on understanding what business development was all about. What does it mean to build those relationships? How do you procure work? Understanding things like contract delivery methods that going into it, I didn't realize how much value that would have down the road, but hugely valuable. And then this is, where some of us had to survive the 2008, 2009 swirl, got spit out in that. And, you learn your wits about you when you get spun out in an economic downturn, that's for sure. So I ended up in the supplier world, working for a precast concrete manufacturer. Again, learning beyond measure. I never realized the learning when I went into these things that would come of it. So that's been kind of the key theme in all of this, is just learning from a different seat and understanding the perspective that comes with being in that seat and looking at our industry from a different vantage point. From there, I have been to a couple different engineering firms before now landing at ISG. Proud to lead a fantastically talented group of marketing professionals leading every aspect of marketing, but also having some influence around how we are going to do business development moving forward. How do we persevere in the market in a time when nobody knows what to do? But it's exciting. So I'm very, very excited to be here. And yes, I started March 30th. So very new.
Fantastic. All right, Craig Anderson. Craig, why don't you tell us about where you are right now, what you're doing, and what brought you there?
Right, I'm with JLG Architects, working as their Director of Business Strategy. What brought me here? My background combines both business and master's degree in landscape architecture, which is how I entered this industry. Have worked for vertical building design, architecture and engineering firms, as well as civil infrastructure, power infrastructure, and telecommunications in my career. Also spent several years consulting on strategy, marketing, and business development to construction equipment manufacturers, which gave me a really interesting picture of the world from that side. And probably a year and a half ago, JLG Architects used to be a client of mine way back in history, and we crossed paths again, and it was a no-brainer. So here I am. And my night job is air traffic controller.
Thank you for acknowledging that.
Sure.
So everybody, I invite you to watch the webinar that we came out with about a month ago now about virtual interviews. We talk a little bit about the technology, and we do recommend going without headphones if you can. What we discovered with Craig is that he sounded a lot better with this external microphone than with his laptop microphone. So you make decisions, right? And you can land planes as you do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, welcome. Okay, so let's look out at the world today. I would love to get each of your perspectives on what are you experiencing in the world of your clientele? What are they going through this? Kind of one of my bigger surprises was when the wall came down, when the world changed and I started reaching out to folks. One of my bigger surprises was very consistently people were saying, yeah, we're crazy busy. There's a lot going on. And my sense now, 7-8 weeks later, is the crazy busyness had to do with projects that were kind of in process when the world changed. But now it is 7 or 8 weeks later. So I'd love to hear it from you. Just what are you all experiencing in your prospects and clients? Who's busy, who's not, who's doing stuff, who's not, what's going on for them? And I guess we can go, we can start with you, Craig.
Okay. Well, it's really hard to generalize across markets or segments. Really, so that 7 or 8 weeks you were talking about, I think everybody every individual organization was trying to figure out what that meant for them. And so it really depends on the client and their appetite to take on risk and to keep forging ahead, and how they fund their projects. Specific to the one segment that has been pretty uniformly impacted is healthcare, which long-term has great prospects, but right now is on a bit of a pause, just for straight on building design and construction, just because of the situation they're dealing with.
Gotcha.
I would say there was, can I chime in?
Absolutely.
I would say there was some extreme busyness that had to vet itself out by way of, do we charge through this gate quickly? Can we get through the gate quickly with a kickoff and a start? Or do we like hold? There was some holding. We saw some fairly minimal contract setbacks, like, oh, we're just going to shelf this for now. But I think there was a lot of scurry around go. There was also some scurry around on the public sector, if there was a need for public engagement. How do we do that? Because of course we can't host a meeting at the community center. So how do we do this engagement, which, you know, everybody caught up quickly on. We all have caught up on how you manage remoteness virtually, and so that was just it was just an exercise that made everybody busier, because that was not a step that ever had to take place before. So there was the hurry up and go. There was the hurry up and go, now figure this out because we have to and we can't all get together. And a little bit of the, well, we're not sure, in a few of the, no, we're not going to do it. So what I think is a greater unknown is what this is going to look like, you know, how long that delay carries out. If we look into the future, like, is those that delayed, how quickly do they come back? Do they come back, or are they, you know, I think that depends on what it is and where it is in space and time. So.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And have you noticed any trends at all in terms of the kinds of projects or the kinds of industries or markets that are kind of full steam ahead compared to a little more caution, a little, yeah, we're going to wait until we can see around the corner before.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious on the wait and see is your corporates and your retails and those that are really dramatically affected by physical presence of human beings in the space, right? The charge ahead is those that have the money. At K-12 is like racing. I mean, they got an extra month, right? Some of them were hedging their bets on it and starting earlier, anticipating that this would come to this, which I think is bold. It worked out. But yeah, it's really that we have an extra month. We have a backlog of either we had a project that was going to start in June and now we can start with an extra month, or we have a backlog of some deferred maintenance that needs to take place that we're going to kick ahead with now because we have some funds to do it. I mean, K-12 is a little bit limited in their access to funding, but this didn't affect their funding mechanism quite like it affects transportation's funding mechanism, right? So transportation doesn't have money when people aren't using the roads and putting gas in their cars, whereas K-12, they still get the money, still comes through. So.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah, I would echo that. The areas being impacted will be hospitality, retail, some of that housing. With some folks I know that are in the hospitality side, they're trying to figure out just what their current operations are going to look like at the end of this. Are people going to want to stay in a hotel? How clean is it? What does it look like? What does it feel like? And what does that do to future design and construction in some of that area as well, from a retail and hospitality perspective? Healthcare, I think, is going to be different. There'll be some pent-up demand there, as Craig had stated. What's my crystal ball look like? I couldn't tell you. Is it 12 months out? Is it 6 months out? Is it 18 months out? They're going to address the current concerns that they have related to what's happening today. In some hospitals with scaling back with furloughs and layoffs, they're going to look differently how they operate, possibly too. Their business model may look a little different on the backside of this as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
And
the other
go ahead.
other area that I would add to that, as Chris mentioned, the other areas that on top of what Chris mentioned is food and industrial. I mean, our supply chain has already taken a pretty significant hit with all of this. So what does that look like from a from a production standpoint, whether it's milk, cheese, animals, whatever it is, somehow there's going to be a design trickle down from this. How quickly can we react? How dramatic does it get before we can there's a lot of unknowns around that, but our food supply is huge in this country, right? So we can't continue this without a good food supply chain.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So based on what you're seeing out there, how are you experiencing that translating inside of your individual fields? Part of the reason I picked the three of you, by the way, is Tanya, you're all about engineering. Chris, you're all about construction. Craig, you're all about architecture. And I imagine that this stuff has impacted each of those three things in slightly different ways. Why don't we start with you, Tanya?
I would say the impact is same but different. I mean, right now construction gets to ride out. They always seem to have a little, and further down the food chain you go, right? They get the delay. They get to ride this out, which is good and bad, right? There's sort of a false sense of reality when you're riding out some workload that is not going to near its end for 6 or 12 or 18 months past, when everyone else starts to feel the pinch, right? So I think there's a point in time, I would say, in terms of how has it affected our workload. I will say that my team is crazy busy right now because our seller doers are doing everything they possibly can to stay in front of clients and provide that added value, whether it's we're doing a lot of webinars ourselves, education, go through the opportunity to educate your clients on things that they're wanting to know and things that are helpful for them to know, that things that they're requesting. So there's a lot of education going on. There's also still proposals that are the proposal pipeline is still busy, which is good, but I think that's part of the lag. Design and construction at large is always delayed in the lag, right? We don't feel these things right away, which is, I think, where I get a little concerned, because what does that look like down the road? What are some other things we're doing? I mean, all of the marketing activity going on right now is around client connectedness and staying in front of our clients in a meaningful way, in an authentic way, but also in a way that they are desiring. I mean, they're taking the time right now to learn as well. And think ahead to what do we need to be doing differently? How is this affecting our facilities, or whatever it is that we need to, whatever service or product we're providing, what do we need to be doing differently around that? So
cool. And so morale wise, are people like not hung up at all, not concerned at all, feeling like, wow, this is great, things are strong, and I have no cause for concern?
I think Craig should take that one.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
thanks, Tanya.
No, anytime.
Morale has generally been good. I think all of us have anxiety. How long is this thing going to last? And there is so much uncertainty out there that actually game planning and anticipating how we're going to have to react to that is key. So thinking through different possible scenarios and preparing and enabling ourselves to anticipate change. But morale, at JLG, our company is really spread out geographically to begin with. So the switch to remote working wasn't a huge change for us, and people have generally taken it in stride. We were lucky in that we didn't have big production or process changes that had to take place. We were pretty much ready for remote work from the day this started. So there hasn't been a lot of anxiety or stress created by having to make that switch. It's more parents working from home with young kids, having to navigate client meetings, and behind the scenes, I think this isn't going to be news to anyone, but just people navigating those stresses and making sure we're having to work extra hard to make sure we're ready for our day.
I'm curious, can I interject a question? Am I allowed to ask a question, Pete? I'm curious if there's a difference in your different offices, Craig, if you notice it, because we don't have a presence in North Dakota, which I feel like is kind of skating along up there, but I know they're not entirely, because of course they're affected too. But do you notice a difference between South Dakota? I mean, I know Minnehaha County was affected, but Rapid City certainly is taking things, probably seeing things differently in North Dakota and Minnesota. How do you see that difference playing out?
You mean in terms of actual
the morale? Yeah, just the morale and how the kind of the hitch and the get along. Any of those hitches and the get along, has the experience been the same across each, or has it been a little bit different based on the region?
It's small differences, but nothing drastic.
Nuances.
It's not like our Rapid City staff went hiking or anything, or
escaped it entirely.
Right. So
yeah.
No, it's and our workload is really spread across our offices. So
right.
We're bringing people together, typically from Rapid City, and putting them together with Grand Forks to produce a project in wherever. So it,
right.
Not really a great geographic difference in response.
Okay.
Great. Chris, it looked like you wanted to chime in a second.
I just think, from a morale perspective, just as you do internally, you do the same externally, and back and forth is, how are you doing right now? Being real, checking in with your staff, seeing what they're doing it virtually as well. Sometimes it's picking up the phone and calling one-on-one. What's keeping them up at night? Mm-hmm. And on top of that is, I don't like to use the word, how can I help you right now? How can I help? How can I support you? Sometimes help makes it feel like, I'm struggling or I'm deficient in something, where support is, I'm here, let me know what I can do. And I've been using that too with, working independently right now with clients, because I'm still working with a few clients and teams that want me to be a part of their teams. And it's, everybody can use support right now. I mean, it's a very interesting time, be it technical support, as we were talking earlier, to just some morale and pump you up, pat on the back support. I think that's what needs to happen with the outreach to your clients. And I like to work closely with existing clients, existing centers of influence, kind of your top 10 list in engineers and architects from a construction perspective, as well as centers of influence. What are they doing? How are things going? And you hear a little bit of everything. And it's, some of the fun stuff I've been able to do is couple virtual coffees, and a number of happy hours as well, which has been fun, just to get a group of 4 to 5 people and talking strategy or talking what's going on, and just being real. So I've seen that change a little bit, where it allows people to be just people, I think, and you're not asking for the business. I don't think now's the time to preach or look for it, but as Tony said earlier, working at value, understanding the situation they may be in as an organization, if it's manufacturing or if it's food production. They're getting highlighted in the news quite a bit. I grew up in rural Iowa, so I understand the food production side of things, and I'm seeing the negative impact that's having to family, friends, and relatives. But I think just seeing how people are doing right now and listening to them, and through that, things will start to percolate and come out of those discussions where, note to self, bring this up in a few months, or bring this up in a few weeks, or ask permission to talk about it. So I think it's just being real and going into your day with a goal and a strategy, and trying to stick to your goals for the day. If something gets in the way, try to assess that at the end of the day or the next day, because a lot of it's you're coaching yourself through this.
Nice. That's fantastic, Chris. Sorry, go ahead, Troy.
No, I just wanted to chime in with a couple of questions from the audience to make sure that we get some of those in. Chris, you touched upon it a little bit, but I think each of you would be great to get some perspective. The question is, how are you prospecting new clients? Are you trying to generate any new business at this moment, or is it really about just the touch point and seeing how you can support them? So Chris, you touched on that a little bit. Maybe there's more you want to share, and then Craig and Tanya, I'd love your thoughts.
I touched on the existing client piece. I've been fortunate in a couple of those conversations, really without asking, but it's from very trusted, close professional and personal friendships as well, where they said, hey, you should talk to XYZ company. Let me make an introduction. I, in turn, have made a couple virtual introductions myself. One was through a Zoom meeting, which was fun. That was yesterday morning. So I would say it's probably, you know, a 90-10 or a 95-5 mix of existing to new. I've been fortunate that some of the new, and as you work through that, it may just kind of happen.
Mm-hmm.
But focus on your customer experience. I think both Craig and Tanya are doing that as well, and their seller doers at the same time is important to stay in front of your existing clients. That should be your primary focus, and sharing value with them, or at least listening to what's going on, and less talking, I guess.
And are you finding that people are receptive to new conversations right now? You know, I got to confess, when again, when the world changed, I mean, the first thought that occurred to me is, wow, I'm not going to be able to get anybody on the phone. Nobody's going to want to talk to me right now. And then a friend of mine, several weeks later, said, boy, I've been having a great time connecting to CEOs who have never picked up their phone before. They just want to talk. So what's been each of your experiences?
Well, I think at first,
oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Craig.
I think at first, a lot of us did have that reaction where nobody's going to want to talk to me. You know, focusing on taking care of our existing clients, just what Chris said, but more and more, I think we have to accept that this is somewhat normal for a while, and life has to go on. And understanding that everybody else out there is trying to carry on as usual. So being transparent, being don't being shy about engaging with people. And I have found actually that you can have some fantastic conversations that you otherwise never would have been able to have.
For.
Yeah.
I would chime in. I've kind of been checking. I have I'm intrigued with the introvert, I have to say. As a complete extrovert, I always wonder, well, first of all, I'm fully aware I can completely overwhelm that personality type. And it's always fascinating to me, like what will totally wear out an introvert in any specific setting. So I have checked in with a couple that I know that I'm close enough to say, so how does something like this affect you? Is this enough in like time for you to be introspective? And they've even said, like, this is kind of even too much for me. Like heavy introvert, so I think we are social creatures, and all of us at once got shoved into our private homes and our private spaces, and so it kind of became this like, so I think I think everyone is desiring to connect, and has time to connect. So now it's a matter of, you know, feeling that boldness, if you will, to reach out and have those conversations. Because Craig's right. I mean, there's conversations that we can have now that we, a month or 2 months ago, wouldn't have probably had time for or taken time for. So,
So what I'm hearing in that is, now that we've been all cooped up for a long time, even the most introverted of us might be open to somebody saying, you know, it would be good for you to reach out a little bit and call a client or call a prospect, which they normally would resist, but maybe might be more open to.
For sure.
Yeah, don't be afraid to share what you're doing and the things that your organization's doing, or other organizations, things that you hear, best practices, how they're approaching things. You know, and at times, if it feels right, ask for the business. See what you can do to get things going.
That's great. Can the three of you talk a little bit about video conversations over phone conversations? Now that now that video conversations are way closer to the norm, does that mean that you are reaching out with those on a more regular basis to prospects, or is it still always a phone call first? What's your experiences?
I think if it's a prearranged, you're right. Zoom meetings and team meetings have become the norm. If it's a prearranged conversation, if you arrange it by email or whatever. But as far as just picking up the phone, I can't say I've done that, and I don't know any of our employees who have made an initial contact with a video call.
Yeah, we agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I did have an experience where I sent a Google, I'm using Gmail and Google Calendars. I sent, I think you'd mentioned, is it Google Hangout earlier when we were talking, Pete? Or maybe it was you, Troy. I sent that out and just as an invite to have a call for today. And I call him, he goes, oh, I'm on the Hangout. And I go, what's the Hangout? But I should have put Chris is going to call. And, but I like to start with the phone call. Maybe I'm been around long enough. I like the phone call and then set it up, like the introduction meeting I did the other day, that was via video. I just thought that would be a great way to do it. And I got permission from both to do so. I don't want them to be uncomfortable. And I always ask, what's the best way to communicate? Well, I was phone, text, email. Now it's video is the fourth one that you add to that list.
Yeah, so true.
I'd like to add to that actually, because there's a question that came in specifically about that. Any advice for a full-time business developer whose greatest tool has always been the face-to-face meeting? If you can't do that face-to-face meeting now, how are you all adapting to make those connections?
I'll readily admit I don't like not having face-to-face, physical face-to-face, but I've really grown to adapt to video. However, I did learn a little bit about choreography today. My computer planted a bit too much, so I'll be truthful. I've got my computer balancing on a stack of books so that it looks like we're facing on. But I think through the webinar you did last week, things that you can do, lighting and such helps. But I enjoy the video piece. Is about as close as you're going to get to having that interaction. Phone is great. Actually, I've used FaceTime a couple times if they're comfortable with that. That I prefer the personal interaction, face to face, or at least where you can see the person. You can see, facial. When you say something, oh, geez, they didn't react real well to that, or they did react well, or they're not in their head. It always helps to see some of the body language because that can tell a lot to the story as well.
Yeah, and is it safe to assume that you're reaching out to folks initially with the phone? You're starting the conversation with them and getting them to a point where normally you would say, well, geez, I'd love to buy you a cup of coffee or something like that. And instead of that, you're saying, well, geez, I'd love to set up a video conversation. Is that how it's going? Yeah.
And I've got as far as, when the curtain lifts a little bit and some of this, retail starts to open up for further conversations, utilizing my calendar to set those future meetings or follow up. There's just a lot of tools that we can use now in our toolbox, I guess, to help us out with that. But nothing beats the personal face-to-face interaction in my mind.
I think in terms of picking which, it depends on your depth of relationship. I know that I've been having, I've embraced much more than ever, like picking up the phone and just enjoying a 30-minute conversation with a colleague that historically we would have gone to get coffee with, but now we call more frequently and have just dive into the conversation we would have had face-to-face in the past. But to, as Chris was saying, once you're getting to know somebody, that's a little bit harder. So then you got to kind of gauge where you're at in that relationship building. And maybe it does make sense to go to some sort of an interface where you can actually see them and gauge reactions and whatnot. But I think we've all really flexed well with what it is really going to take to keep these relationships moving. And my sense is no one's really sat back and said, well, we're good. Peace out. I'll see you in 6 to 12 months. Hope you're still around. I don't think that's happening. So it's just figuring out what works for each individual's personality as well as the relationship depth and those things. So
another question that comes in is a question about touch points. As business development leaders in each of your industries, what's success in a day? How many outreaches are you making? How many connections are you making, say, in a given day or in a given week? And we'll start with Craig first.
Nothing's changed. I don't, a lot of my time these days is spent internally, working with our seller doers, and nothing's changed. I guess I still expect the same volume of outreach. I think the difference is it's shifted towards ongoing clients over new prospective relationships.
That's great. And Craig, are you experiencing a change in how your seller doers are responding to their quotas? And is there such a thing as a quota? Do they have a certain number of conversations they're supposed to be having?
Not really, but it's, so this goes back to the conversation earlier where there were a couple weeks there where everybody was trying to figure out what was happening.
Yeah.
Right. And it really dropped off to just heavy engagement with ongoing clients. But as it's evolved beyond that, we continue, like Tanya was saying earlier, we continue with requests to submit on RFPs. In fact, we have unbelievably a live interview in Nevada this week.
Wait, live? Like
There's
you're in a room together with them?
there's hope. It's in Nevada. Come on.
Yeah, it's in Nevada. So
What happens there stays there, Craig.
yeah, so, exactly. I'm not going. But it's just back to that volume level. We have to get back to a point where we're just conducting business as usual and we have the same expectations for ourselves as always.
Great. Tanya, you were looking to chime in a minute ago.
Yeah, I lost my train of thought on that. we too don't have we don't really have quotas either in terms of the connecting points. I would say, I know what I was going to say, our activity on the business development front has been more along the lines of they may not be a client currently, but we knew that they had something coming down the pike, and so then it's circling the wagons with all of those prospects, if you will, and where they're at with their project development and what this climate is doing to that. And that, of course, varies back to our original starting conversation. That varies by the market segment. But so yeah, they haven't really hung up the towel, so to speak, on business development, but it's shifted to doing it virtually and doing it by way of like, these are the opportunities I know that are out there, and I'll just kind of keep those relationships alive and keep connecting with them. I think somebody had asked a question about the cadence or the touch points of that. And again, I would default to that. On that question to your personality, the personality of the prospect, and just reading the scenario on what makes sense for it, and then add to it this weird economic or this weird pandemic, situation we're in, kind of knowing how their industry is reacting to this.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you just kind of toggled between economic and pandemic situation, because there really is two things going on all at once. Does anybody have any thoughts about the different, how each of those different things are potentially impacting their company or their clients' companies? So pandemic situation compared to the economic situation, which is, in my opinion, it's like, I don't even know what the economic situation is, So who's got something to say about
I'll add something on the economic side. A piece of I guess the detail is the stimulus packages that they're utilizing with the Paycheck Protection Plan, or PPP. I think people are feeling pretty comfortable over the next 8 weeks, because it's an 8-week plan. They did the second round here last week through the SBA. Having been in finance for 20 years, I still have a number of people that are in the banking industry, and I think they're waiting. Some people are waiting to see what happens after that first term of 8 weeks ends. Did they meet their qualifications so that it turns into a grant and free money? If they did not, what are they? It's still a pretty good deal at 1% for 2 years. That's a pretty darn good loan deal. So either way, you're going to come out okay. But is that enough stimulus to help, depending on how long this lasts? Particularly, and I think it's going to be economic related to industries. Some will be impacted certainly much more severe than others. Restaurants jump out at me when I saw it was more of on the joke side. It showed in Europe they're practicing serving people at social distancing. Well, it showed a server 6 feet from the table throwing the plates and the cups. But again, when you look at that, is there going to be enough volume? One, are people going to go to restaurants, go to the shopping, which they seem to be going now. I was at Home Depot and it was packed. It was a line to get in, but they're counting the people. But also, is there going to be enough volume in some of these businesses, if it's customer facing, to allow them to generate enough revenue to keep going? Or is their whole business going to look different after that? Less staff. What's that going to do to the unemployment? So I think, the pandemic and the economic go a little bit hand in hand, but what is the stimulus and what does the support look like as we keep moving that forward?
Yeah. Hey, Troy, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to pass it to you to throw out more questions from participants. So maybe one of the biggest questions on my mind has been, how does this situation affect what business leaders are asking of their seller doers? And the reason I ask this is, in a normal world, you can tell your seller doers, look, you're rubbing shoulders with your clients all the time. We want you to, it would be great if you could just keep your ears open for any reference to future projects, so you can just kind of incidentally say, oh, hey, we can help with that. There are all these sort of incidental little opportunities that seller doers can take advantage of because they are sharing a space with clients, and they're kind of naturally interacting with prospects a lot. In this current situation, that isn't happening nearly as much. So my question to you is, what are you having your seller doers do, or what would you have your seller doers do if you were in a position to have somebody do something? And actually, let's start with you, Craig.
Tough question. So the small talk, the kind of casual conversations aren't happening that would normally happen, but it goes back to being really intentional about your communications and plan your interaction with your client. And it typically, so the small talk kind of casual conversations are happening with existing clients. So we just have to be more prepared and planful as we engage them, so that you don't forget. You don't have the cues to spur the conversation, but you don't want to have to call them back after a call is done, right? So it's almost going back to the basics of cold calling, where you plan out your conversation and really make sure that you cover the ground you need to cover. I guess is my advice.
So like a checklist of topics.
Well, yeah, and we all are having to shift our mode, right? So nothing's weird anymore, really. So if you have be transparent with who you're talking to, and just let them know you have things you'd like to talk about and what they are.
I would piggyback on that, and add to it some mindfulness. And this is a tough one to coach and to bring seller doers along. I think some more innately have it than others, but just some genuine mindfulness of that client's business line, what they're doing, who they're serving, what they're serving up, what they're producing, all of those things in such a fashion, and understanding it with such depth that they can ask, be in the moment of the project and what goes with the project, whether it's the development of the project, the execution of the project, or even the prospect of a project, being in that moment and understanding it with such depth that inherently they're asking the questions that will lead them to something new that they didn't know about. And that, like I said, that's tricky to coach, but that's where I think we have to get to, is really being much more deliberate, really, in what we're doing around business development as it relates to seller doers. That's
Great. How about you, Chris? Do you have thoughts?
I think what both Craig and Tanya said is very appropriate, and I think it's knowing their business, from a customer experience perspective. If they're seller doers, preparing for that call, even though it's an existing client, and some of them are very good at that, and maybe it's natural. Some people, you need to help them with maybe a little bit of a roadmap and taking a step back, and maybe it's just, hey, how are you doing right now? Like I said earlier, what keeps you up at night? What can I do to help support what you're doing? But understanding their business and or that project, what that project's going to be used for. That's one thing I always like to know. If somebody's looking at new construction, why are they doing that? What do they need it for? How's it impacting their business? And I think it's just taking a step back and basic stuff. Really, it seems basic, but it's all real, and it's keep it real and humanize the approach is what's worked well for me. And I know others that are successful take it that same way as well. But being proactive and, don't be afraid to share what you're doing and how you can help them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, the traditional resistance has been, look, I'm really busy doing the job. I don't have time to do this other thing. And that's why I think what has worked so well is, we want you to focus on the job at hand. It's just, it's not a whole lot of extra time doing this other thing on top of it. It feels to me like in this current situation, we can't say that anymore. It really is, you do need to carve out time to intentionally reach out and have these premeditated conversations. So it's not as incidental. It's not as easy as historically it has been. So the one thing that I've heard loudest is, yes, but you've been cooped up for so long. You gotta want to have conversations with folks. So go for it. So in a cool way, that this situation is kind of an opportunity to give your BD folks more practice at intentionally leading these conversations. Okay, this is great. Go ahead, Troy.
All right. So as we kind of get close to the end of the hour, I think I'll kind of collapse some of the questions and maybe bring it all down to one final question that each of you can kind of give us your final thoughts on. And that would be, if there are business development people on this webinar now, if there are people watching, what are each of your top 3 tips that you would recommend and leave people with? What should they be doing today or tomorrow to help them continue their business? Top 3, and kind of lightning round. So just we'll start with Chris, and then go Craig, and then go Tanya.
I think you heard it quite a bit today, is your existing clients, reaching out to them.
Got it. Craig?
I think be intentional and be planful. Pete, you said premeditated. Have lots of premeditated conversations.
That sounds so violent. I didn't mean it in a violent way.
Tanya?
reach out and connect. Don't be afraid. Just reach out.
Excellent. So, do you so I asked for the top three, and you each gave me one. Are there two other?
I was following everybody else's lead. Way to go, Chris. I did write three down. I can piggyback.
Perfect.
I'll piggyback.
And then we'll go back the other way.
Yeah. I like the term mindfulness, just being incredibly mindful in the scene, whatever it is. If you're taking care of an existing client, if you're taking care of a prospect, or if you're taking care of an existing relationship, just be mindful of that relationship and intentional in the building of it or the maintaining of it virtually. And then the third thing I would say is piggybacks on mindful, but how can you be of service to them? How can you really take care of what their greatest need would be at the moment? And everybody's in a different place with all of this, really. I mean, some of us have a pile of kids at home trying to learn. Some of us are terrified of getting sick. Some of us are lonely because we live alone. So being mindful of how you can not only just build that relationship, but how can you help them? Is there something you can do or support them? I really like, that's my key takeaway. How do you support them? I like that, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah, let me chime in on that, because that was one of my favorite tips of the session so far. I do think that everybody is really truly appreciating an authentic conversation with anybody right now. Friend of mine told me the other day that she's a classic introvert, and yet she's on the phone all the day, for 10 straight hours, because everybody is just really enjoying these authentic human conversations. And she said, whereas normally in the past, she could have had a 90-second conversation with somebody just getting some information, every conversation like that is turning into a 30-minute conversation where people actually connect on a truthful, emotional level. So it does feel like we're in a situation where we really can connect with prospects on a level that we probably couldn't normally. So it's an opportunity.
I think another tip too to focus on that I think of is, and I did this pre-pandemic and I think post-pandemic, but right now is focus on the quality versus the quantity of your interactions. And that goes back to the quality of premeditated, proactive preparation. Some people may need to prepare more if it's understand their business more, or even being human and asking how things are going working at home. It's like the other day I was talking to a gentleman that was on a video conference, a Zoom meeting with similar to this, about 100 people, but it was inside their company. His wife didn't realize he was on a Zoom meeting. She walked in and set a plate of food right down in front of his computer because it was around 12 o'clock Central Time for him, where it was a different time zone. But everybody kind of chuckled and thought it was great. What are you having for lunch? But focus on the quality of your interactions, not just how many you can make, because that comes through. If you're just calling people just for the sake of calling, it's going to show, and that'll be a tough call to make a second time because I'm busy. I don't have time to talk right now.
Yeah, I think pre-COVID, it was really easy to be transactional in your conversations. Yeah. And if you focus on bringing value, understand that value the person you're talking to might value something different than they did pre-COVID. It's not necessarily all business.
Well, one other question that came in that I wanted to tie to this, Pete, because it was a question for us at SagePresence. So you kind of touched on one point. I'll offer one, and then if you have a final thought in terms of the 3 tips from Sage, one recommendation I make to everyone out there is definitely get involved in the town hall meetings if you can, that are part of your industry. I've had the opportunity to sit on across the nation, both in Minnesota and in New York, on the West Coast as well. And it gives you a chance to have face-to-face connection with people who are going through something very traumatic for us all in many respects. And I found that I actually could make a solid connection, in some ways deeper than I could have had I been at a conference where we're all mingling around. And so it was far less transactionary in a town hall meeting because we were all there for knowing we're going through this together. So definitely check out those those social opportunities, even though they're through this weird space. It's a chance also for you to know the correct spelling of their name and to look them up on LinkedIn easier.
Yeah, that's a great point. Boy, if I was gonna land on one piece of advice, I think somebody else here said this word. It really is all about empathy. And I mean this in a bunch of ways. I was talking to a senior leader of an engineering firm the other day who was kind of frustrated with his team because he wants them to sell, and none of them have his instincts. None of them are salespeople. They're all engineers, but they're subject matter experts. And he's like, boy, they've got to be part of these conversations. And historically, when he's pulled them into conversations, sometimes they've been more of a liability than a help because they're just not people persons. But I think anybody can build their people skills. And maybe the first thing that can entice them down that road is a leader who can empathize with them and can recognize, I totally get it. You're not naturally wired for this, but you can change the wiring. I am an introvert, and I have very intentionally shifted my wiring to get way more comfortable with sales conversations and way more comfortable with people. And I figure if I can do it, anybody can do it. So my whole point is leaders really can do a tremendous amount in inviting people down the path. And the best tool to do that with is empathize.
Excellent. Well, thank you to all of our speakers for your expertise and your insight on this. For any of you out there who have other questions, don't hesitate to drop them our way, and we will share them with our panelists as well. Feel free to reach out to us. But thank you again, everyone, for tuning in. Best of luck to you. Stay healthy and make those authentic connections wherever you are. Take care.